Christoph, thank you for that introduction. I don't think anyone has ever presented my thesis in the introduction ever before. That is slightly embarrassing. This is the title that Christoph and I agreed on, Science, Technology and Olympic Medals, Secrets or Common Sense. And so I did my PhD back in 1989, finished it in 1989. And I learned a lot from that PhD about creating information that was of use to the end user. It was very important that the people creating golf greens in the golf world could use my data. So it had to have impact. And the journey I went through, I'm going to tell you about the same journey we went through with our Olympic Games. So I started working with our Olympic teams in about 2000, so 20 years ago. And we've got to a place now where we know how to work with them. We know how to create impact. We know how to make a difference. And okay, we have some secrets that I cannot tell you. And there is some information I cannot tell you, but I can tell you the overall story, and hopefully you can learn from my story. And you have 4 years to go very fast towards the Olympic Games, and hopefully this might help you. But you cannot beat Britain in any event after this. Okay, so don't tell anyone I've told you these things. So let me move on. So this is my research center. Hang on, I just need to change my screen. There you go. So of course, this is what it's all about. This is what you want to see happening in 1 year's time and in 4 years' time as well. Oh, sorry, wrong way. So this is what we did. So by 2012, with the work that we'd done, we did 30 projects for 15 sports, and we supported 24 medals. Now, in terms of the number of medals that we had 51 medals in total, so about half the medals. Now, if you look, we had 15 sports that we worked with. These are the sports we think we influenced. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 sports. So only 6 of those 15 sports we think we actually helped with our technologies, getting us 24 medals. By Rio in 2016, we'd done 61 projects in that next Olympiad. We worked with 10 sports and supported 42 medals. This is about 2/3 of the medals. And actually, if you count the sports here, we have 10 sports. So we worked with 10 sports and every sport had medals. So we learned which sports were the best ones to receive technology. And that's one lesson that I would ask you is learn which sports will receive your technologies and your science. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about this story of how we got here. So firstly, how many medals will France get? This is an interesting question. Of course, this is what you're hoping will happen. If we look at Australia and we look back at Australia, so Australia hosted the Olympic Games in Sydney in 2000, and we see that they got 58 medals there. If we go 1 Olympics before, Atlanta, they had 41 medals. And if we go 2 Olympics before, they had 27 medals. So let's see how well Britain did. So here we have Britain. This is in 2012. This is the London Olympic Games. So 1 Olympics before there in Beijing. So here we had 65 medals. In Beijing, we had 51 medals. And 2 Olympics before in Athens, we had just 30 medals. So let's see where France is. So France is here. France is actually doing quite well. Okay, you're quite consistent. And this is 2 Olympics before, obviously. We have missed 1, so we should have 1 next year. And you now you had 42 medals in the last Olympics. Actually, that's greater than both Australia and Britain had. in the 2 Olympics before. So what you should be seeing next year, you should be seeing something like, you should be getting about 50 medals if you want to hit your targets, which should be around 60 medals in Paris in 2024. So this is your challenge. This is the research center we have now. This wasn't around for the Olympic Games, but this is what we have now with our successes. I managed to get some money, about 20 million euros, to build this building. So this is what we have now. And actually, I have to say, it's not just Olympic sports in here. We're looking at population health as well, but that's another story. This is the team. Some of these have left now. This is one of our away days. So mostly young, enthusiastic. I'm probably oldest by a long way. But, you know, males, females, very excited, enthusiastic bunch. And I expect that you all look the same. If I could see you, I'm sure I would see similar faces. This is the sort of thing we do. This is just one of our labs. This is one of our old labs, in fact. And so we have this researcher, she's a Dutch researcher, Bodil, and here we have 2 researchers pretending to play rugby. Here we have a crash test dummy. In here we have accelerometers, strain gauges, and actually we're looking here at the studs. We're looking at stud performance, and actually this was for the Rugby Football Union. We're looking at the role of studs in injuries and trying to change the specifications. That's not so important, but here you see all the tools at our disposal. We have mechanical devices, we have high-speed camera systems. You can see we have 2 camera systems there because we need to have 3-dimensional photogrammetry. And you can see around the lab all sorts of equipment. In fact, Christophe, here is the modern version of that bowling machine. This is the bowling machine that I used in my PhD 30 years ago. A newer version we use for tennis. So we still use that even 30 years on. So science, technology, and Olympic medals. I'm going to talk about these things. So these are the things you need to know. What is allowed by the rules? Okay, there's rules of physics, which tell you what are all the possibilities, but then there's the rules of the sport. And those rules of the sport they are arbitrary and they change over time. So you need to know those. How do we know how technology works? Sorry, I'm distracted by the cat. How do we know that technology actually works? In fact, I'm going to shut that screen down so I can't see you, right? So how do we know that technology works? How do we monitor the best technology? And this might be technology we use to take measurements, but also technologies we use for our athletes. So you need to keep an eye on all the best technologies across the world. And then how can we actually measure performance? How do we actually do it? How do we do it so that we can create systems that coaches can then use? Because that's where it's important in the Olympic Games. So this is what I will tell you about today. So what is allowed by the rules? Well, you know, that's easy. They're on the internet. Every sport publishes the rules. And here we have a document I did. You might see the date. This was 2013. So this was after the London Olympic Games, where I was asked by UK Sport just to do a scoping review about technology and elite sport. Where did we see technology going over the next 17 years to 2020 and beyond? And we did an audit of all the rules. And I can't show you this because this is, you know, confidential information of use to us, but there's not, you can do the same. So we started at A for archery. So we started with archery. And actually what we found with all the different sports, we looked at different technologies. So first of all, there was the equipment technologies. And you have materials. So materials have changed sports in the last 30 years. So carbon fiber, graphene, they've changed sports. Then you have design. Can you make design changes? Can you change shape? Can you change balance? Then you have Aerodynamics and hydrodynamics, very important in things like cycling. Then also, so these are the equipment technologies. These are the technologies that the athletes use. Then we have the enabling technologies. These are the mobile systems which we might collect data with. These might be sensors that we put on the athlete and use databases to collect that data. And it might be video systems. So we're just watching, we can watch with video. What's the best we can do with that? So you have the technologies that the athletes use, and then the technologies which the coaches might use. And then, of course, you've got communication. Are you allowed to communicate? And here we're generally talking about during a tournament, during competition. So we looked at these different areas for all Olympic sports, and we looked at winter sports too. Of course, we looked to see where the best nations were, to see what they were doing. And then we categorized every rule. See here, this is a rule. And we categorized each rule that there was no rule, loose restrictions, some restrictions, a very strict rule. And of course, where it's green, this tells you where you can start making changes. If you want to, you can make some changes and perhaps improve performance. So that's what we did, and we did this audit, and that allows us to move forward with our technologies, knowing that when you get to the Olympic Games, they will not be banned or outlawed by the ruling body of the sport, and that's very important. So understanding what influences performance. And so this is partly about understanding the physics and partly understanding the size of the changes that your technologies and your research can make. So it's good to have an understanding of how big or how small your research can influence a sport. So I'm going to go way back. Athens, 1896. So sports change over time. We kind of think they don't, but they do. They do change over time. And back in Athens in 1896, this was the surface. It was a rough surface. Actually, there's no starting blocks. You've got different styles here. I'll let you look at the picture. See if you can predict which of those athletes was the winner. If you think about it, you can probably tell which is going to be the winner. Okay, and for those of you who think it's this person here, you're absolutely right. So this person here had adopted the modern pose where you can push off and you get that best start. And that start is the thing that leads you to victory. And this is Thomas Burke from America. So by London 2012, of course, technologies had changed. And we have these instrumented starting blocks. We have strain gauges inside the foot sensors, monitoring any move. They'll stop you doing a false start. You even have a little loudspeaker here behind because they are so reactive, these athletes, that the length of time it takes the sound to arrive at the athlete is really important. So no one can have an advantage. So everyone has their own bang, their own gun sound behind them. So if I look in the data, if any technologies in running has had an effect, we should be able to see it in the data. So here we have the men's 100-meter sprint. This is going back to 1896 up to roughly the current day, not quite updated the data here. And of course, you see that times have come down. Here we have the dark circles. They are the best times in each year. The light circles are the average of the top 25 in each year. And I've written papers on this. You can find this in my papers. And if you look at the things that have influenced performance most, well, okay, the world wars, you can see there, First World War, Second World War, performance goes up in both. You don't see it in the best times, but you see this data in the average times. So there's something to learn from. And when you're choosing your data, if you're choosing sparse data, you can get very different answers to when you look at the average data. And all of these are outliers. You know, they're top 25, they're not part of the normal distribution, they're the extreme outliers. So you have to use your data wisely. So I looked in all this data, could I see the effect of running tracks, shoes? The only thing I could see the effect of really was the fully automated timing. That's going from stopwatches to the instrumented starting blocks. And actually, that fully automated timing, they made times go up from 10 to about 10.25 seconds. They actually made performance worse. So not what I expected. I would have expected maybe technology is always better. No, in this case, fully automated time was worse. And that's because it removed the reaction time of the judge's thumb on the clock. So the lesson here is to choose your data wisely and understand the size of the performance differences you can make. So that technology had a difference of 0.25 of a second. Any other changes you might make are going to be much, much smaller, new shoes, new technique, and so on. If we look at the pole vault, Lavilleni's specialism, you can see that this is the modern style that we have for the pole vault. If we look at the data in the pole vault, then you can see some interesting things. So there's the women. There's the first interesting thing, that it was far too dangerous for women to do pole vault until nearly 2000. But of course, men were allowed to do it much, much earlier. Sorry, that was irony, just in case. I don't believe that it was too dangerous for women. So here what you have is you've got the First World War and the Second World War making these differences here. But certainly here what you see before the Second World War, you see that this is starting to level off. Then after the Second World War, it goes up again, and it was just starting to level off again. And actually what happened, these composite poles came out. Here, this was this was hickory poles, solid wooden poles. Then we had bamboo poles, and then we had metal poles for a while, and then we had these composite poles. And what we have is we have this huge increase in performance as athletes change the style, and the poles became flexible. So here, this introduction of technology actually has quite a massive influence. But even then, we now have this leveling off of performance. And that's something we see in most sports, is we have this leveling off of performance, reaching an equilibrium. And technology is becoming a little bit more useful, because they can make the difference to different athletes in that fine, those times and heights and distances here. So if we look at the javelin, again, the javelin is instrumental in telling us how much we can affect a sport in terms of technology. Here, hollow javelins were introduced. So prior to that, they were solid. Then people realized they could make them hollow. And that improved performance a little bit there, partly because they were slightly bigger, and partly you could start doing some aerodynamic features on the javelin. In the men's javelin in 1983, Uwe Hohn of East Germany threw a distance of 103 meters. Now, that's just far too big for most stadia. So the ruling body said we need to reduce distances. So what they did is they brought in a rule overnight. They brought in a rule to make a change. And this change just basically changed the center of mass distance on the javelin. And here's my miniature javelin. So here we have the javelin. They moved the center of mass forwards, so it always kept the nose down. So prior to 1983, it would fly like this and it would land like this. Now it flies like this and it lands like this. So they brought in a rule change, and that subtle change of technology reduced distances by about 10 meters. So about 12%. So technology can influence sporting performance. Now, what I've done over the years is I've taken all sorts of data, all sorts of sports, to say, how can we look at performance improvement? And I created this performance improvement index. It's very simple. You normalize to 100 on a date. And we've chosen 1948 as the first Olympics after the Second World War. Prior to the Second World War, that data is very different, and you see the effect of wars and so on. But after 1948, with global stability, you see these performance improvements, which are generic across most sports. So here's a paper if you want to read this in detail, how I do this. But effectively, for something like the pole vault, what you do is you take the height now, divide it by the height in 1948, and convert it to a percentage. So if we look at the pole vault, this is the pole vault. So here we have pole vaults now of about 35% higher than they were in 1948. So that is the men's pole vault. Women's pole vault, we don't have enough data. It didn't go back to then. So things you see here, all sports seem to be leveling off. You can look for different technologies in these sports. Women's sports tend to improve more than men's sports. There's lots of reasons for that, partly that they weren't allowed to do those sports before. Once they do those sports, there's a lot of improvement because they're starting from a lower level. You also see the effect of drugs. We cannot ignore the early effect of drugs. So you can see these lumps here are the drugs effect. So actually performance would probably have gone like this without drugs. And this lump here, sporting performance never goes down in general. It never goes down unless you're stopping somebody doing something. And here we have WADA being introduced, random drugs testing being introduced, and that stopped people using those drugs, which is why performance went down. And you see it more in women than in men. These are all the track sports. Most sports, again, are leveling off. Sports that aren't leveling off, marathon still seems to be going up. So there's a lot of improvement for marathon. So the longer distances seem to be the ones that are still improving. Those sprint sports are improving less. So what we have here, don't worry too much about the measures. You can look these up in the papers there. But the key here is to take the data and work out for yourself your own performance improvement index. How are you going to measure performance? And every sport has their own way of doing it. This is my way of doing all track and field, but of course, boxing is not track and field. Canoeing is not track and field. Fencing is not track and field. They have different data. So you have to have your own ways of measuring performance and looking for improvements. So that's very important. So moving on. So monitoring the best technology. Again, I'll go back in time to show you how different things change. And I'll start about 120 years ago. This is what swimming looked like 120 years. This was performance swimming for women in about 1895. If you went swimming in that, you more likely die than give a good performance. So this is what happened about 1900. This is a woman called Annette Kellerman, and she came from Australia, and she said, I can't swim in this. This will kill me. I'm going to wear a swimsuit. And actually her swimsuit ended around about here above her knees, and actually didn't cover her shoulders. But because of the social mores of the time, she was told to cover herself up. So actually she ended up with this full bodysuit, which is interesting because we'll come back to that. So she was wearing a full bodysuit back in 1900. So by 1908, people were thinking that they needed lightweight suits. This was made of wool. And of course, wool absorbs water. So by the end of an event, this is a very heavy swimsuit. So what people started to wear was silk swimsuits that didn't absorb water. So there was a performance improvement. I love the look on this woman's face. This is the chaperone for these young ladies, and she looks very severe. And by the 1980s, we decided actually that no clothes were better than clothes. So we're starting to remove as much clothing as possible and having a smooth body wherever we could. That reversed again in about 2000. So this is what happened in 2000. And they went back to the Annette Kellerman idea of having these full body suits. And here you've got Ian Thorpe, who's got a full covering all the way down to his ankles and to his hands. And then by 2004, we had this, actually 2008, we had this swimsuit. This is the Speedo Laser. And this had Lycra in these parts here, but these parts here were polyurethane. So these were hydrophobic. And if you look at a hydrophobic material in a swimming flume, and I should imagine you have a swimming flume over there in France somewhere that you're using, you can see the performance, and you can usually see it by the sheen. This is where the water is being rejected by the swimsuit. And we're looking for performance improvements. And we've done a lot of hydrodynamic studies on this, so we know what the performance improvements of this are. Of course, the rules have changed now. You cannot have a full body suit. You are limited with what you can do. So we're tracking what the new rules say about the swimsuits that you can wear. But of course, the things you're looking for is you're looking for to reduce bluff drag behind the body. You're looking to reduce skin friction, and you're looking to reduce the wave drag here as well. So reduce the waves, reduce the skin friction, and reduce the bluff drag. That's what you're trying to do with your swimsuit. And the swimsuits are generally quite tight because they pull the body in and they stop the body wobbling around. So different suits work well for different people. Back in 2009, this is Paul Biedermann from Germany, and he was seen as an outsider to win medals. And this is Michael Phelps, and Paul Biedermann beat him by a second. And he wore this full body suit. This is full body polyurethane. He only wore the ZX laser, which only had partial polyurethane. And if you look at the performance improvements over those periods, what you see is you see these gradual improvements in all the events. And then you see the introduction of these new swimsuits, and you see a rapid improvement. Now, had the ruling bodies said, that's okay, we'll leave them, what would have happened was that we'd have had equilibrium, and these performances would have gradually just leveled off, but up here instead. Instead, they outlawed the swimsuits, so they drop back, and you see performance, you see performance here, and you could almost ignore all of this. This just continues. And we get this continuous kind of slow improvements as people improve their performance. We find the best athletes and so on. But again, this tells you how much technology can improve performance. We've got about a 3% improvement there in that technology. And if we look further down, actually, it's not the same for the different events. And we could talk about that later if you wanted to, but you don't get the same performance across all events. So monitoring technology is really crucial to making sure your athletes have the best that is available. I'll give you one more example. This is going quite a long way back. You can probably tell it's quite a long way back just by the design of the bike and the handlebars. This is Victoria Pendleton, and I think this is about 2004, I think it is. And we were asked to look at different helmet designs. So which helmet should she use at the Olympic Games? The rules allowed 4 different types of helmet. So now to do that experiment with Victoria Pendleton on a track is really quite difficult to measure those performance improvements. So instead what we did is we did this, hopefully you can see this thing moving. This is the helmet. In fact, I've got the helmet here. So we have the Giro helmets, and you can see it's got a spike on the back. I've got a very small head, so I can get her helmet on. So there you go. I do like to do my lectures in my hat sometimes. So here you see the aerodynamics around there. And then if we move on, you see the aerodynamics. This is the start. This is how she would start. And of course, when you're on the bike and you're trying to push off at the start of a sprint, then your helmet goes up like that. And of course, this sticks up in the air. So what we found was, although this was the best helmet overall, that she should keep her head like this as much as possible, because when it goes like this, the aerodynamic drag increases. And of course, what you see now, if you look at helmets now, you'll see that they chop the end off here precisely for that purpose. We also done the same. So this is computational fluid dynamics. So what you have to do here is you have to scan the athlete in, you have to get the computer aided design drawings of the equipment, you put them together, you create a mesh, and you then stick it in your supercomputer and you let it run 1 day, 2 day, and then you make some subtle changes and so on. But what it allows you to do is it allows you to quantify performance. So here we're looking at how much drag comes from the different parts of this particular model athlete. So the athlete makes up about 58% of the drag. The wheels make up about 17% of the drag. And then this front end makes up about 25% of the drag, with the wheels making a few percent of the drag. So, of course, what you can do in those models, you can make some subtle changes which allow you to improve performance in ways that you can never measure out on the track. You can't see those differences because those differences are too small. So this is the way you can understand the physics of what to do. So now we've kind of got an idea of the physics and what we can do to improve performance. The question now is, if you make something and give it to the athlete, can you actually measure it working in practice? This is the trick, and this is what I learned in my PhD 30 years ago. So the first way is to do a little bit of predictive modeling to try and understand what you expect. And of course, I think some of you are working on cycling projects, so you will probably have looked at this. So you've got a bike, you've got the propulsive force of the rider, the aerodynamic drag, and then you've got various forces here. So this is pretty standard first year mechanical engineering. Then you might create a model. So here we have a model where we've got all the external conditions. So the altitude, the temperature, humidity. So this tells you the density of the air effectively. Then you've got information about the rider's mass, their frontal area, and so on. And Christoph talked about this frontal area idea. And then you've got some things like the bike mass, the drag coefficient of the bike, the bearing efficiency, the efficiencies of different parts of the bike. And what you can do is we can measure all of these things, but with our model, we can subtly change these things to find the best combinations, even going down to which tires can we use. And then you can make a prediction of the results. What you need for things like that is you need some experimental data in there. So this is a power profile of an Olympic athlete with time. This is the 4-kilometer event, which doesn't exist anymore. And here you have the rapid increase at the start. So in the theory would tell you it shoots off to infinity. In practice, it shoots off to 1,200 watts and then levels off about 500 watts, something like this, until they just drop at the end off the bike. So you need some experimental data to go into your model. And of course, one of the ways you get that experimental data is from a bike like this. I apologize for the picture. This is the only picture I could find of this device. And it's one of those marketing shots that people take. So apology for me being on that bike. So this is an SRM crank. So this is the crank. It's instrumented. So we have sensors in the crank here. We have sensors in the pedals, and you can see we've got some wires going over here, across here. Now, what's interesting about this bike is this is allowing us to do some bike fitting. So if you can see here, we've got the handlebars going backwards and forwards. That can go up and down. This can go up and down. That can go backwards and forwards. So you can look at the optimum position of the athlete and measure that optimal power profile for that athlete. And then you can create the bike accordingly. If you look on here, this is some of the measurements we have. Now, of course, what you're asking the athlete to do is to give the maximum power output, and they need to know how to do it. They need to have the muscle memory to be able to do that. And quite often you're asking them to do very, very complex things. So here, hopefully, if I'll play this and then I'll stop it so that I can show you different bits. So, oops. So hopefully, oh no, it's not working. Hang on, let me go back and forwards again. Let's try this. Oh, okay. Excuse me, just 1 minute while I do this. And let me do this. Oh, I've killed it. I've really killed it. Oh, right. We might just have to stop. Let me just stop sharing so that I can. Oh, my computer's stopped doing everything. I can't even stop sharing now. Let me do this. Ah, okay. Phew. Let's try again. No. Okay. Sorry, my computer has died.
This happens.
It does. Well, you know, when you live by technology, sometimes you die by technology as well. So just give me, actually, so Roman or Christophe, can you stop me sharing?
Okay, I'll do it.
Yeah. Oh. Okay, can you still hear me? I can't see you.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, listen, I haven't stopped sharing. So if you would like just to take a 2-minute break,
yeah.
I'm going to restart my computer. I'll be back in just a few minutes. My apologies for this.
No problem.
No problem at all.
For the record, it was perfectly working at 8:50 when we did some tests.
Okay, I will be back hopefully by 9. So
Okay.
just take a few minutes just to restart. I don't know what's happened. Nothing is happening. So excuse me just for 1 minute.
No problem.
Romain?
Oui.
J'ai reçu un message de Patrick Beau, je vous l'ai transmis, pour savoir si jamais les gens pouvaient se connecter. Est-ce que vous l'avez?
On va répondre. Donc là, on est sur le live YouTube. Donc Steve Haake a indiqué 9 heures, c'est l'heure chez lui en Angleterre. Et donc, il sera de retour pour 10 heures, heure française. Donc, on va faire une petite pause.
OK.
Et pour les personnes qui sont en ligne, ne pas hésiter à poser des questions dans le chat YouTube. On fait le relais sur Zoom à partir duquel nous présentons. Et donc, on fera le relais à Steve Haake à la fin de sa présentation.
So the problem is solved, Steve? I don't hear people anymore.
Right. I'm back. Whew. That is so scary. Yes. Okay, let me try again. Okay, I once did a radio program, and it was going out live, and we had a piece of equipment, a treadmill, VO2 max monitor, everything. And with 30 seconds to go live, it was not working. Honestly, that was very, very nerve-wracking. So my apologies, everybody. Hopefully this will work. So here we go. Right. So what I was talking about here was how you actually take measurements, how you measure performance. So hopefully you can see a video moving. So here's a picture at the top. This is the athlete at the top up here. And we're doing some automatic tracking of some little markers on the joints to get some joint angles. We've got pedals that are instrumented so we can measure force. And that allows us to do some inverse dynamics to work out forces back up the chain and look at torques created at the knee and torques created at the hip. And what you can see here is you can see these, you might see some circles appearing. So I will stop it just in case you can't. So if I just scroll up here, you can see some torque at the knee, some torque at the hip. And what we're asking the athlete to do here is to create the torque using their hip rather than their knee, or vice versa, and giving them some of this coaching information. Now the athlete can see this data live. So the athlete is looking at a screen and can see that information. And then the coach can ask the athlete to do certain things. And then we're looking at maximizing the power output with body position, the bike position, the bike design, and the athlete's proprioception of the whole system. So hopefully this works. Okay, and then once you've got what the athlete can do, how you get the power athlete from the athlete, we can then go, well, that's the best position for the athlete. Let's design the bike around the athlete. And then you have the bike here, and you can work on an athlete, and you can work on the aerodynamics. And here you can see the aerodynamics, which is a large part of it. Again, going back to our computational fluid dynamics, this gives us a little bit more insight before you then make the bike and you send it out there onto the track. So now that all of that actually was measuring something in the laboratory. We're still not outside on the track. So how do we measure things in situ on the track? And here's a nice example I thought for you guys from Roland Garros. So we were asked to measure the performance of tennis players on a tennis court during the tournament. So of course you can't attach anything to an athlete. Literally you can only use video. And we were told that we were only allowed to have one video. So there's our video up there in the trees, hiding behind a bush. And this is the view that we get from our one video that we're allowed. So how do we take some three-dimensional measures of what is going on using our single camera? It's quite difficult to do. Normally you need lots of cameras. So here we have our image from the camera, and this is the center of the camera, but this is the center of the three-dimensional coordinate system based around the axes of the net here. And we have to create a camera model. We have to take into account the aberrations. These arrows tell you the error of the camera lens, the spherical aberrations. In the middle is the best image. So you create mathematical models of the camera, you calibrate the camera, and so on. And that allows you to do some quite sexy things. So here you'll see probably a staccato image from the camera in use at the ATP finals. And here you've got Sampras. And what we're doing is we're tracking his pseudo center of mass. And you might also see some red dots on his feet. We're tracking his footsteps. And what we have is we have a plan view, a 2D view of the tennis court. And we can now track the position of the player. That's the green dots. And the red dots are the footsteps. And actually what we were looking for here, we're looking for slips. When does the player slip? Why do they slip? How do we change the shoes? How do we change the surface, and so on? But actually what we created here was a single camera gait analyzer. It took 3 years, but it's allowed us to use it in lots of different scenarios. So here we have some footage from a tournament from the BBC, in fact. And what we've managed to do here, this is the World Championships, I think in 2000 and, I can't remember, 8 maybe. And what we can do now is we can actually track the footsteps. Because the camera isn't calibrated here, it's the BBC's camera, the only thing we have is temporal data. So you can see here, we've got the number of steps, we've got a time, so therefore we can work out a frequency rate, a step rate. So a bit further down the track, so about 10-15 meters, you can see that Usain Bolt has a step rate of about 4.6 hertz. Justin Gatlin, who was favourite to win this day, was 4.9 hertz. Further down, Justin Gatlin's ahead with 22 steps, 4.7 hertz. Bolt is here. Just on the line, Bolt comes through. His frequency is actually dropped. Gatlin's frequency is also dropped. So this gives us information about the athletes that we can feed back to the coaches, which is better than what they have now. This is a modern version of this. What you'll see here is we're tracking with a bicycle the athlete, and we can now put on a rudimentary skeleton. We can look at the sweep of the feet, again, to inform the coach of how to improve performance. This is always live. So this information, the coach can see this information as this thing is happening. And this is something we've used, that same system as Gait Analyzer. Hopefully you can see some footsteps appearing with this. This is actually a doctor who's looking for abnormalities in the gait of his patients, some of whose might be athletes. And what you find is, if just a very simple measure, what you can see with healthy patients have a longer step length than sick patients. So healthy people have a longer step length than sick people. Healthy people have a shorter step frequency than patients, and healthy patients therefore walk faster. And basically what you're seeing there is you're seeing that someone who's healthy will have a natural long gait, whereas someone who's got some kind of abnormality might have abnormal short gait. So we're looking for these abnormalities, and again, I'll show you in this next sequence how we might do that further. So I'm sure you have this kind of motion capture lab where you have many cameras tracking an athlete, and here we have an athlete with some passive markers on. You can see them being reflected, and that allows us to take some measurements. So here is some vertical and medial lateral measurements of an uninjured athlete on a treadmill. So treadmill inside the lab, and that athlete is going up and down, but also going backwards and forwards. And you get this beautiful classic butterfly shape as they kind of go backwards and forwards, left to right, but also up and down. Now, what we can do is, out in the field, we can attach a very small sensor to the small of the back here, and do some very clever calculations and get the same information, vertical, medial, lateral. So this is with a single inertial sensor, and this is what you get with a very complex, very expensive lab-based camera system. So you can see the similarities here for the same athlete using different systems. This one is a matter of dollars. This is a matter of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So now we can start looking at patterns. So this is what someone looks like with an ACL tear. So you can see immediately there's some asymmetry in this shape. You almost don't need to know the size or the measurements, or you need to know the pattern. The pattern is telling you that there's something abnormal. And here we have someone with a very strange injury. I haven't seen the video. I don't know how this person is actually running. So this person has some very significant injuries, but was a footballer and was claiming that they were ready to go back on the pitch to play. So of course, what we need to know is this the pattern normal that the athlete had, or is this due to the injury? So you need to do some longitudinal measures. But we now have the ability to do those measurements on the field by just attaching very small sensors. So now, working with Olympic sports, I'll rapidly move towards the bit you're interested in. So working with Olympic sports, Christoph showed the sports that you work with. Here are some of the sports that we work with. And this is where perhaps I'll tell you how to create systems the coaches can use. So this is the design side of what we do. So what we tend to do with every system that we create, we will define the problem, then we will develop a system and very quickly deliver that system. Define, develop, deliver. This definition part is inordinately long. This can be about 25% of the time you spend on the project. A typical project here that we would work with Olympic sports might be weeks, it might be months to delivery, but it's generally not years. It's really quick turnaround. So this might be 25%, this development might be 50%, and this delivery might be the other 25%. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So how we do this is we co-design all our systems with the coach, and actually even more so with the performance analyst. So what is the question that they're asking? What is it they really want to know? And what you have to do is you have to translate what they want. What is the question? So what the coach is saying is in coaching language, and that's not in scientific technical language. And quite often we as scientists can set off thinking that we know what the question is, and actually it's something very, very different. A very good example would be when an athlete, a coach is talking about power. I want more power, when actually they mean more force. So if you go down the route of measuring more power, you'll actually be doing the wrong thing, because you might want to measure force. So build a prototype really quickly. That's what you have to do. So once the coach says they want it, you've got to do it very quickly to deliver. You then test it with the coach. So even though this thing is a prototype, you get the coach to test it and ask them how they would improve it. What is it they want? If it's got a screen on it, where are the buttons? What's the flow of the data, and so on. So they're designing it for you. And then you improve it, and then you go back to the coach and you test again. And this bit is the development bit. This is the 50%, which will go really, really quickly, really quickly. You might have 10 iterations of this until the coach goes, okay, right, I'm ready to use it. So here are some examples. Hopefully you can see this. This is an early one for gymnastics. We start to have to give them names. This is called iGym. So here we have a very simple system. It's a camera, it's on the wall with a screen, so you can see on the opposite wall the same system. And you've got some judges here, and what they wanted to do is they just wanted to record what was going on, so that when they were giving marks for this to do a test. So they were giving judges marks to these athletes, and they wanted to look back at those videos to just reflect on the marks that they were giving. And if it was a good mark, the athlete could then look at this video and go, okay, that's what I did. Let me remember how I did that. So that's a very simple system. The coaches here wanted no part of the technology. They wanted a button to switch it on, and that was it. And what would happen is this athlete, as they went past this part of the image, it would automatically set the timer and record this video. So the coaches would do nothing with this apart from switch it on in the morning, and everything else would be recorded automatically, and you can see these recordings here. So here's a simple system as well for judo called iJudo, something very similar. It's a camera system in the dojo. There's someone just running it. There's the designer. They're seeing how it works there. So that's just basically simple video record and playback. And you'd be surprised how many athletes and coaches do not have simple video playback. So some of these things are really quite simple and don't involve that much science. They involve technology, but not so much science. This is a little bit more sophisticated. So a swimming system where we're looking at starts and turns. So you're looking at having calibrated cameras, you're looking at tracking the athletes, you've got all sorts of complex controls, but these controls are all designed by the performance analyst. So these controls tell us what they want, we program them in, we set up the system, and away we go. This is one for diving, more sophisticated now. So this camera is calibrated. It's not just recording. So hopefully you can see some words starting to appear here. So what happens here is the athlete dives into the pool. When they come up, they see an automatic review. As they go up onto the board to do another dive, taking the feedback from the coach can make some notes on that video, send it to them and send it to their phone. So afterwards, when they get together outside the pool in the cafe, they can talk about the lessons that the coach wants to get across to this particular athlete. And you can see there's measurements and things that make a lot of difference. So those measurements have to be about right. You're not talking about very specific measurement because you're talking about coaching. It has to get the right message across, and the coach is in control here. I like this one. This is a hammer system that we created. We have a box here, a suitcase, and out of the suitcase comes 2 cameras on arms. We have some calibration devices here, and then you shine those cameras towards the hammer cage, and there's the athlete. This is the hammer here. This is the thing we're trying to track. So we have some quite complex tracking system here in the cameras, the algorithms here, which allows us to track the hammer as it's swinging round in 3 dimensions. And that gives us information about the velocity, about the radius of the circle, and the angle of the plane. And then gives us the launch speed and gives us the launch angle by which we can predict some of the trajectories. And you can see there's a comparison of 2 different throws in here. So again, the coach sets up the system, a little bit more complicated, but it basically presses go and goes collect, and it all automatically analyzes. And then you go collect again, automatically analyze. So the coach is retaining that coaching skill and using the technologies to inform themselves and the athletes and reinforce the messages that they want. This is probably our biggest system, the boxing system we have here in Sheffield for our Olympic team. It's called iBoxer. And here we have videos of bouts. We have information about who was there. So there's a big database behind here. But I think one of the keys here is this system is portable. So although we have all the servers and all the data back here in Sheffield, the coaches and the performance analysts can go anywhere in the world, and we've worked out mechanisms for them to collect data during a tournament, share data, and so on. So sharing of data is becoming more important now. And there is Anthony Joshua. He's the world champion. He came out of Sheffield. And he used this system. This is the system in the boxing gym in Sheffield. And here is Simon, the programmer who created the whole system. Just to say, we've also done Winter Olympics as well. So short track speed skating. So here we have a short track speed event. This isn't our stadium, but in the stadium we have cameras in the ceiling which are calibrated to allow us to track trajectories and track performance. And you can see here's a bit of software, again, designed by the performance analyst to give the coach what they want. Excuse me. Excuse me. So what do coaches want? Okay, what they want is they want measurement in situ. They don't want it in a lab. They want it in the place where the athletes are performing. They want the feedback of simple measures. Don't give them too much information. It might be just one number that they're looking at today. Tomorrow it might be a different number, but you don't want to overload them with too much information. What they want is they want it immediately. They don't want to wait for 2 weeks to get that bit of data back, because neither they or the athlete will be able to remember what it was they were talking about. So you have to have that information immediately, preferably with video. Most of the time, our coaches are wanting video to go with the data, so the data and the video are synchronized in some way. Often they want the data calibrated so it's meaningful, but don't go overboard with this. It has to be good enough to show performance difference for that particular athlete. So measuring joint angles to 0.01 of a degree is just not necessary. And then what the coaches want, they want it low cost, because they might want 10 of them. It cannot cost €500,000 to create a system. We're talking here maybe tens of thousands of euros to create the system, the camera, the computer, and so on. And once you've convinced them to work with you, they want that system immediately. They'll say, okay, you can do that. Okay, right, can I have it next week? Can I have it now? In fact, I want it. Can I put all my old data in there now? So they want it immediately. They're very demanding because they have a deadline, usually of 4 years for the Olympics. So if you get that process right, then you can get to this. So as you can see here, we had, as I said before, we had 6 sports. We worked with 15 sports, but only 6 we felt were really successful. If you get it right, you can work with 10 sports and all 10 sports can be successful. So thank you very much for listening. I'm sorry about the glitch. Bon chance with all your work towards your next 2 Olympic Games. If you want to know more about some of the things I've said, I do have a book out, but there's another book. So there's 2 books. There's that book out as well called The Talent Lab, written by Owen Slott. And that actually tells you the story from the directors of performance at London 2012. So that's their story about how they did it. And then, of course, that's my book about, technology in general. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve, for this very inspiring talk. We have time for a couple of questions. I think you can read them in the chat. Can you?
Yes, let me have a look.
Yeah, I think it's the best. You can pick any
Are
questions.
you investing and researching a lot for next? Yes. So we have, we resourced from Beijing to London. That was the first one. We have resourced from London to Rio and Rio to Tokyo. Of course, we don't know after Tokyo yet. So we have a funding cycle of 4 years. And so one of the things we are lucky to have is centralized government funding for 4 years. So we know that we're going to be working on Olympic sports for the next 4 years. Given limited resources and since performances are slowly rising until a breakthrough technology, regulation aside, would you invest in plateaued sports, slowly climbing ones, or mediated zones? Oh, that's a very good question. Ooh, what would I do? The most important thing is to work, probably the most important thing is to find the coaches that are receptive to you working with them. That's probably the most important thing. So then you look at the things they're asking you to do. Will they change performance? So our funding is not huge. When we started, it was very small. We had about 50,000 euros in total when we started. And that made us focus on 2 questions. 1, is it value for money? And 2, will it affect medals? So those are the 2 questions. And those are the 2 questions we still ask. Is it value for money because it's public money? And secondly, will it affect medals? Those are the only 2 questions we ask. And that's the approach I would take. In terms of whether they're plateaued or not, the most important thing is getting the knowledge and the understanding that can make your athlete work better than your competitor. That's the only thing that matters. Last question.
Steve?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting. If you want to read the questions so that the people following on YouTube can actually hear the questions that you are
is this your question? No, this isn't your question. Okay, so
but it's just that they ask them on YouTube and they don't see on Zoom how you follow the.
Yes.
Otherwise, I have a question myself.
Please.
Is that so you talked about the coaches and how we can integrate them, and we actually want to build a system for them. And how much should you consider the coaches capable to use technology, and how much can you consider that you can actually train them so that they would use properly some maybe more complex systems?
That's a very good point. Coaches, there are some very good technical coaches. There are some older coaches who really just don't like technology. They don't like computers and so on. So again, our approach generally is to go with the champions. So you find your champions in the system that like the technology, and you get them to help you co-design the systems. Then what happens is, you know, the world of sport is very small. As soon as someone gets some piece of technology, something that might give them an advantage, everybody knows about it. So particularly in your own country. And so what you find is you find those coaches who are almost ready to accept technology. They look and they go, how did you get that? Where did you get that from? Why don't I have one of those? And so then they go, okay, well, you can have one. You know, they helped me. You know, Christoph, he developed it for me. Go and speak to him. He'll give you one. And then what happens is they start to talk and they start to share and they start to want the technology. So you can never push technology at someone. They just won't accept it. So you have to get them to want it. And as soon as you have something to show, word gets around very quickly. So in the very first Olympic Games, so between Beijing and London, we were always pushing ideas. No, not always, sorry, about 50%. Pushing ideas, accepting ideas from the coaches. And by London to Rio, we have the coaches coming to us. Can we do this? Can we do this? Can we do this? Which is why we were more successful. Shall I read this question? From Romain, for long-term development, not Olympics, N to N+1, IA isn't the next big technology breakthrough to improve performance with that much data. Okay, I think, yeah, so artificial intelligence, I guess, is the question. So I think the question is artificial intelligence the next big technological breakthrough to improve performance with that much data? Maybe. So with something like artificial intelligence, big data, you need big data. Okay, so when you've got a population, you have lots of data, you have big data. If you have individuals with a lot of data, so a lot of data about one person, it doesn't always work. So you look at a team and the team might have 5 people in it, 10 people in it, and might not be enough, depending on what the thing is you're trying to change. So artificial intelligence doesn't always work. It can help with measurement, but might not help with prediction. So prediction usually needs a lot of data. You need a lot of data, and not many sports have a lot of data. And Olympic sports, the data is very sparse. So I wouldn't spend too much time thinking that artificial intelligence is going to give you the solution to all your problems. It's nice, sexy science problem, but actually it's the way that you use these solutions for the coaches which make the biggest impact. Giving a coach a camera system they can use is much more important than having a camera system with AI in it. That's the thing that they want. There's some of these simple things are the things they want most of all. But yeah, it's a good idea. It might happen in the future. So from Roman, so from you, Roman, do you want to read your question, Roman, rather than me?
Sure. I think it's a timely question. So what do you think COVID, what's the impact of COVID on the sport performance, on your research? Did it impact you?
Okay, yeah, very interesting. I think that the biggest impact is funding, because all our funding patterns are 4 years, and then suddenly we've now got this extra year, and everyone in the sporting world is going, how does this work? You know, Olympic Games, I've got an extra year to support myself, to whatever. So that's the first thing. The second thing, if you look in the performance data, performance has this oscillation, Olympic oscillation. So this 4-year cycle. So at the Olympic Games, it's performance is higher in general in all the athletes in the world, and then it drops between. So athletes work towards improving performance in time for Olympic Games. Now that has been disrupted. And the things that have been disrupted are training. So people have to train in situations which are abnormal. They don't have access maybe to the labs, the coaches, the facilities that they've had. And the timing is all wrong. So those are the things that have impacted the athletes. And I think one thing we'll probably see in Tokyo, when it happens, is that we might see a little bit more of a leveling between countries. So we've got countries like France, Britain, America, where the athletes are now struggling to do their training. Okay, this is what it's like for the rest of the world. The rest of the world have this all the time. So developing countries, who have less money to spend on sport, you have athletes who are working 24 hours a day to do a job, gain money, performance, etc. And so what we might see is we might see a little bit of a leveling off of performance between countries in Tokyo. We might have some surprises in Tokyo 21, I think.
Okay, thanks again, Steve, for your talk and for answering those questions. I think we'll continue with the rest of the conference. Steve, you are welcome to stay. Unfortunately, it will be in French, but I know YouTube now has a very efficient translation system, so you might get subtitles once we'll make the videos of the talk available.
Yes.
Many thanks, Steve.
Thanks again.
Good luck, everybody. Thank you very much.
Many thanks to you.
Thank you.
Bye.